So making the complex simple and the simple exciting really takes into context the world in which we exist. We have finite resources and infinite choices. And that makes making a decision extremely difficult for most people. So your role as a brand is, with that context in mind, is to make it as easy as possible for people to choose you over not only your competition, but all the other choices that they have, even outside of the particular category.
I'm Eric Fulweiler, and this is Scratch, bringing you marketing lessons from the leading brands and brains, rewriting the rulebook from scratch for the world of today. Hey everyone, today we have Abey Mokgwatsane. He is the CMO of Investec. They are you've probably heard of them if you're anywhere in the UK, and certainly if you're in South Africa. They're a South African-based brand that is now global. They are a bank and wealth management business, and Abey does not come from this world, and that is actually something that we talk about a lot. He has been what he calls a, quote, super sub throughout his career. So he worked a bit in the agency world. He was in the beer brewing world at SAB down in South Africa. He was also at Vodacom in the telco space. He was the CEO of Ogilvy, South Africa. Now he's come into financial services. So he talks about, I think it's very relevant to people thinking about their next career move, kind of the pros and cons of coming in to a new category. A lot of what we talk about in the interview and what he's doing at Investec comes from this principle that he has of how to make the complex simple and make the simple exciting. And simplicity and focusing on the fundamentals, but doing them in an exciting way, 100% lines up with my philosophy as well. And lastly, Abey has been a subscriber of the Challenger brand philosophy since Adam Morgan first wrote the book now 25 years ago. And he talks about some of the specific kind of tactics and rituals and applications of that mindset that he's using at Investec. So a really great conversation. I think you're really going to enjoy it. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Abey Mokgwatsane of Investec. Abey, thank you so much for making the time. I've really been looking forward to this conversation. Actually, ever since I was in your office, I know we didn't meet, but I was in your office in Johannesburg over at least our summer, your winter. And your name came up as someone that we should have on the show. So thank you so much for making the time.
I'm glad the universe connected us, man. I hope you had a good time here.
I did. You know what? I'm not going to go on too much of a tangent because we haven't even started the interview, and our audience might not be as interested. But I love South Africa. I went to University of Cape Town back in the day. I actually tried to move there, and I couldn't find a company to hire me. I interviewed at Quark. Remember that digital agency Quark that was famous? They didn't hire me.
I couldn't get the name. That's what.
Yeah, both of us forgot when we were talking about that in the briefing call. But it was my first time to Joburg. I had a great time. Obviously, as rival, we've got a few people on the ground in South Africa. We're building out a team down there. So yes, I really enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to coming back in January. We're going to be doing a CMO roundtable in Joburg, so I've got you on the list for that. I will let you know when we have a date.
Awesome. Looking forward to it.
Cool. All right. Well, let's get into it. So the icebreaker question that we ask every guest: what is one Challenger brand that you're particularly passionate about right now, and why?
So it would be On, a Challenger brand that I'm really interested in. And I think that they went and took on a really established base of brands out there. And in many ways, they are beginning to dethrone the likes of Nike and Adidas. And their focus on technology is something that I think has been able to have very broad appeal, from sports enthusiasts all the way down to, soccer dads. That focus of technology and how they bring that forward, I think, has been quite refreshing. And it's been something that I think Nike probably skipped a beat on, which, they were always really on point with. So yeah, that would be my favorite. On is one of my favorite brands at the moment.
Yeah, that's a great one. We've got a particular interest and passion for that category, having done the global repositioning for Reebok, taken the heritage of who they are as an incumbent, but bringing a bit of a Challenger playbook into that. And it's amazing how much that category has been disrupted over the last few years, is continuing to be disrupted. So On is a great example. So let's talk about Investec. And as you said briefly, before we pressed record, it's a really exciting time in the business. It's at a historical high. in terms of the results that y'all are putting out. It's the 50th birthday of Investec this year. You just took over sponsorship of a major sports property as well. So for those who might not know, can you give us an overview of Investec, what it does, and kind of where it's at as a business and brand right now?
Yeah, so Investec is an international bank and wealth manager. This is our 50th year of existence. We originated in Johannesburg, and we are listed on both the Johannesburg Stock Exchange as well as the London Stock Exchange. In fact, if you look at our relative size as a business, we would probably make it into the FTSE 100 if you combine the total value of the South African and the UK domiciled assets. And we're a business that is powering on. You know, we have a purpose of creating enduring worth, and that's something that's been a real North Star for us. So we are feeling, while we are 50, we've got that kind of youthful entrepreneurial flair that powers our business. So yeah, that's Investec.
Yeah. And really that's what you need to stay relevant and stay growing, especially, you know, financial services. Of course, I have a particular passion for, having worked at a fintech venture builder for 3 years before starting Rival. But even in businesses like yours, where it can maybe be a little bit harder for kind of challengers to come in, I think wealth management is fascinating because that is absolutely going to be disrupted, but it's kind of one of the last bastions, at least in terms of consumer, because, you know, people don't want to take risks. They don't want the innovative solution with kind of new challengers that come up. But for us and our whole thing about Challenger brand, it is much more about the mindset and model that you take to growth, not how old you are or how big you are. And at the end of the day, Reebok, Investec, any brand you can think of, it was a challenger when it started. So it's always fascinating for me, and in the work that we do on the consulting side, for us to come across incumbents that are thinking and acting like challengers. And of course, that's the whole point of the show. So I'm glad we got the right guest on here.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think it's always more difficult in established categories, especially being an established player, to do something that kind of challenges convention. I think it's helpful if your organization within its DNA has that type of mentality built in. You know, when this business started 50 years ago, the founders walked into a category that had already established players. And even in the name, Investec, it's a combination of investment and technology put together. It sounds, you know, quite blasé today relative to all the other fintech names that are out there, but you've got to cast your mind back 50 years. You know, all the big financial institutions had very traditional names: Barclays, Lloyds, First National Bank, Standard Bank. So even at the very origin of the business, the founders were thinking about challenging convention and coming into the market to provide something fresh. The other thing that really made them distinctive was around their focus on service. Our founders found themselves in New York, and they stayed at the Four Seasons Hotel for something. In fact, they didn't even stay. They had lunch at the Four Seasons Hotel. And they committed themselves at that point to say, we want the experience that we give to feel like the Four Seasons. So you had this kind of really interesting, organic combination of attributes that the founders bound themselves to right in the beginning that has sustained our challenger attitude over time. But that was something that we did right in the beginning. I think it would be much more difficult taking on an established brand and trying to do that, even though, you know, the secret of being a challenger is always thinking like a number two, even if you're number one. Yeah, I don't know any brand that doesn't say in their brand strategy, we want to be a challenger brand.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Everyone claims that, but it's really difficult. Really, really difficult.
Yeah. And I love that Phil Knight quote. You know, the best way to say number one is think like a number two. And if you don't mind me going off script very early on in the conversation, I'd love to double click on that because, you know, 50 years old, you know, it's always fascinating to watch kind of challengers that are startups then try to get to the next level. when it's not a team that can all sit in one room together, where everybody who's hired maybe doesn't feel like this is their purpose in life, is to realize the mission of this brand.
Yeah.
How, you coming into the role at Investec or just the business overall, because I would imagine that part of this sits within your domain, right? Maybe at the connection point with you and HR when it comes to internal communication and culture internally within the business. How do you think about maintaining that ethos of what it was in the beginning, now that it's 50 years later, so many more people, probably the founders not there, not involved anymore. How do you maintain that?
Yeah. So the way that we've maintained, I guess, our perspective on the world is, first of all, fortunately, we had the founders in the business were around for a very long time. In fact, one of our kind of founding leaders still sits as a non-executive director on our board. So I think in a 50-year period is a relatively short period of time where, you had the influence of the majority of the founders over that period of time. So that helped. I think the second thing that really helped out was one of the things that we do and take pride in is in our own storytelling. And we were telling stories about our culture, and we were telling stories around what we wanted, the impact we wanted to have on the world. And that storytelling narrative and that capacity is something that really, I think, in a way, became a leadership attribute. So the people that could tell the best story about our business were the people that really stayed and did well within the organization. So that just trickled down, and it created this organic ability of the business to keep reminding itself around who it truly was and what it was aspiring to. I think third piece is really, I think what helps is to have very basic or a limited amount of things that you're talking about. So we spoke a lot about our entrepreneurial culture. We spoke a lot about our culture itself, which is, it's a flat structure. We speak to engage each other a lot. And we believe in a very relational organization. So it's, people are engaging all the time. And then the third piece that we spoke a lot about was our service and how we always wanted to be kind of, a real service, have service ethic at the core of our business. I think those things, the ability to tell stories and having very simple chapters of stories to tell, allowed us to be able to continue and sustain this organization. So my role as a CMO and my broader team is to be able to tell those stories and go into the history and find those stories that really best tell people what our ambition is and where we're coming from simultaneously. So that, I actually think it hasn't been that difficult because it's been an organization that's so deeply rooted in storytelling that we just had to kind of just polish some of those stories off and present them to people. And they just love them. We had a very receptive audience.
Yeah. It's really interesting to hear that the founder is still involved in that kind of chairman role. One of the other meetings I had when I was in Joburg was with the founder of Nando's, and he's kind of done a similar thing. And, Nando's in the UK and certainly in the US doesn't have the same connotation, but in South Africa, it's probably at the top of the list in terms of brands that are purpose-driven, brands that really show their values, brands that really show up in culture in a meaningful way. And I think that's a big part of it. His chairman role or whatever his title is, he's still involved. He's not about commercials. It's not about revenue. It's not about product. It's about culture.
Yeah.
And so, while at some point you need to scale that beyond the person, oftentimes it is there. And keeping it consistent and going back to those stories that you can really tell people internally to make sure that that spirit stays alive. When we work with the incumbents to help them adopt the Challenger playbook, a lot of it is going back to the beginning because they were a Challenger at one point. What are the stories? What are the examples? What's the heritage, the Challenger heritage that exists in every organization, if it's still around, that you can actually bring to the surface? So I think that's really exciting. And this is a great segue into, the first topic that we wanted to talk about.
Sure.
Because you're already doing this. In our prep call, I love to ask the question of, if we could give you a soapbox for the industry, what would you say? And you had a great answer. You said that your ethos behind everything you do in marketing is to make the complex simple and the simple exciting. I'd like for you to expand on that for us.
Yeah, so making the complex simple and the simple exciting really takes into context the world in which we exist. We have finite resources and infinite choices. And that makes making a decision extremely difficult for most people. So your role as a brand is, with that context in mind, is to make it as easy as possible for people to choose you over not only your competition, but all the other choices that they have, even outside of the particular category. So that for me is the fundamental basis, not only of marketing, but I believe of leadership. People don't have to choose you. People are inundated with choice. We almost have, I know the theory of opportunity cost is based on the fact of, in the choices that you haven't made, there's particular costs to those. It's a cost foregone. And that's what the technical definition of opportunity cost. And I almost think that right now, our opportunity cost is exponential. It's infinite because of all the amount of choices that you've got. So that's what we have to do. How do you give your people and your clients and your staff and, all the stakeholders that you have just really simple reason to choose you over and over and over again? And it's difficult to do because we always want to do so many different things.
We always want to do so many different things. And often I feel like, what's the right way to say this? I'm not entirely sure. Sometimes human biases or dynamics can get in the way of doing the right work or good work. Marketing for me, my soapbox would be marketing for the sake of marketing. How much marketing gets done that is not clear-cut, black and white, 1 + 1 = 2. This is what we need to do to drive growth of the business.
Sure.
And I get it on the one hand, self-interest maximization. People are going to make their own decisions about things. And particularly for businesses that maybe they don't feel super connected to, I get it. But, we had this conversation at the CMO roundtable that we did this week in London. Oftentimes there is just that human element. I think a lot of CMOs out there, they read all the headlines. They've been in the industry for a while, how short the tenure is. Yeah. They want to make sure that they're not messing up. They want to make sure that they are delivering headlines. So for example, oftentimes I feel like, a new CMO coming in, they want to get a headline. They do a new positioning. We were talking about at this dinner, North Face and their new tagline. I forget exactly what it is, but they moved away from Never Stop Exploring, which is one of the most iconic ones. And it just feels like that was kind of a, marketing for the sake of marketing type of moment. I have no idea. That might be totally unfair. But I do think oftentimes we as marketers make marketing more complicated than it needs to be. Sometimes it does not need to be that complicated. And sometimes actually the answer is to not do the thing. There's an example I saw on LinkedIn of an ad that's been running in the tube, the same exact ad for 15 years. And it's about a supplement that gives you energy. And it's like, it's working. Why change it? You know what I mean?
Why change it?
And so, we as marketers want to put headlines on our CV or out on LinkedIn or whatever. Agencies, of course, want to make their money. They don't make money from not doing anything. But I do think simplicity is at the core of effectiveness. So it's different for everybody, but I really love that as an ethos.
Yeah, I don't think it's just the marketers that will be responsible for changing the messaging. I mean, by the time someone changes the tagline, like North Face's tagline, there's a whole lot of influence. There's an entire ecosystem, and it's great that guy. This is a great idea because that's a big decision.
Yeah.
We have tried to, and I think this kind of stems from the storytelling and the respect of the heritage that we have of the organization. Is we've often said the secret sauce lies in where we've come from and in the vision that our founders had and all the leaders that have come up since then. So let's keep true to that. And I think we've got some really distinctive positioning. We've got distinctive assets. We've got a distinctive payoff line. We've got a service ethic that is a real differentiator for us in the market. So it's been easier for us to kind of keep it consistent. But even within our own ecosystem, I think we've got to points where it's getting a little bit wobbly. I have a really good relationship with the previous CMO, the real kind of legend of our brand, a guy called Raymond van Niekerk. It was in his tenure that the zebra was born, and Out of the Ordinary was born as a payoff line. This is now almost 25 years ago. And in the conversations with him, I've been able to just keep having that energy and being rejuvenated to freshen up what we have rather than trying to try new things. But yeah, people get bored quickly, right? We get bored of our own work before our clients even see it.
Yeah. Or before the consumer does, for sure.
Yeah.
Hey, everyone, just another quick interruption. If you're listening to this podcast and you're not already part of our AMP community on WhatsApp, would love for you to get involved. So AMP is a community that we started at the beginning of the business, really, just to kind of bring together some of the interesting people that we were talking to, the marketers that we were coming across, many of whom have been on this show as well. And so now AMP is about 300 senior marketers from around the world, from various categories, different stages, challengers, incumbents. And it's really a place where people can share questions, can share resources, can make new connections, can use folks as sounding boards. And for those that are in it, it is a very vibrant community. It's really taken on a life of its own, which is amazing. So if you're listening to this and you want to get involved, please go to our website, wearerival.com. There you can find the application form or reach out to me or someone at Rival directly. Thanks so much. So you mentioned this word consistent a few times, yes. And this is one of the other quotes that I jotted down from our briefing call. And I'd love you to just kind of expand on this. So you said that it's better to be, quote, freshly consistent instead of consistently fresh. What does that mean to you and why is that important?
Well, I think every single marketing department wants to be relevant. And they, in trying to be relevant, keep changing brand narratives to try and appeal to that particular market. And therefore, they lose their simplicity and they lose their distinctiveness and sometimes their own differentiation. So I believe in trying to keep things as simple as possible so people can choose you more often than not, is to kind of take what you have and apply that in a freshly consistent way. So if we have an icon that is the zebra, how do we use a zebra in interesting and iconic ways that are going to keep getting reevaluation from existing and potential client bases? Again, it could be seen as really boring, but that's the stuff that builds memory structure and builds loyalty and builds understanding. And I think it's even, this issue around trying to keep consistently fresh all the time. As younger people keep coming through and becoming new clients, we all get paranoid. And the older you get, kind of the more detached you get from understanding what's going on in young people, in the world of younger people. So you keep wanting to try and do fresh stuff. You get your agency to come up with that kind of fresh new ideas, new connections, and it often falls flat on its face. So that's why I believe in that.
It's actually probably relatively similar to kind of my first principle about marketing. I think the fundamentals are the same. Humans are the same. It's about how do you tell a story that changes perception and behavior. Our psychology, our sociology, it hasn't changed in the last 5, 10, 50 years. How you deploy it, how you show up needs to change constantly in order to be effective because the world around you is changing: culture, media, technology, the competitive set, the product within. So the pillars, you need to be consistent in the pillars, but how you execute them, you need to be fresh.
I listened to the podcast with Andrew Davies, and he was speaking around what you optimize for. And I think that's the piece that we're talking, that's what we're talking about. The tools of optimization are going to change as the world changes, over time. But the foundation of what the brand stands for and what it's trying to achieve, that has to be completely consistent. And then you can change the different things that whether you're optimizing in different media formats, whether you're optimizing for growth in a particular segment. Those are the things that you're going to apply your current intelligence to. But you've got to keep the core solid.
So I want to ask a quick follow-up question because you brought it up, and it's something that I think about all the time. Staying relevant to younger audiences and culture. asking for a friend, how do you do that?
So I am, as an individual, and something I encourage my team to do, I'm extremely curious. So nothing is ever too strange to read about. I try and read as much as I can. I listen to podcasts. I listen to radio. I read widely and broadly. I listen to the radio. I look at YouTube and the kind of feeds that people are going through. So half my time, in my curiosity time, I call it, is learning deeply about my industry and my particular craft. And the other half of the time is trying to figure out what the world is looking and thinking, and reviewing and going through. And I encourage that throughout my broader team. And through that kind of collective intelligence, we're able to have a better assessment around where the world is and what's going on. That's how we keep current. I don't think it's easier today than it ever was, right? Because everything is it's on your phone, literally. So
yeah. Hey everyone, just a quick interruption to share a really exciting announcement about some new research that we have put out about the rise of microcultures. So as you know, we at Rival are all about understanding what are challenger brands doing differently to grow within categories that are being disrupted. And one of the biggest trends that we've seen over the last few years, and this comes straight from the brain of our Chief Strategy Officer, Lance Koenig, is that challenger brands are mapping and tapping into microcultures to drive relevance and talkability and ultimately growth. They have flipped the playbook, the incumbent playbook of top-down macroculture on its head, and they're doing really exciting and differentiated things. So if you want to learn more about it, there's a landing page on our website. There's going to be a link in the show notes here. Go read the report, listen to the limited edition podcast series that we put out with it as well. I think you're going to find it fascinating and really valuable. Let me know what you think. And I'm curious, do you have, how do you make sure that you do that consistently? Do you set time in your calendar every day or every week, or what's the ritual that you built around it?
So there are particular titles that I will follow on a daily basis. There are then kind of podcasts, kind of deeper listening material that I will go through over the weekend, which, at a point will take me an hour or 2 hours. I read long format, so I will try and get through a book or 2 books a month. That is usually the space that I have over my weekend time. But I have to schedule it. So I have a very clear understanding around when I've got 10-minute chunks of time versus 30-minute chunks of time through the week. And then over the weekend, I've got, much, much longer chunks of time available to me. But the most important thing is you can't read everything. You can't absorb everything. So it really has to be a team effort. I'm trying to even get my family and my friends involved in helping us collect information that's out there. But I'm ever curious. And structuring a way of getting that input in is great. And by the way, when I read for understanding and memory, right? So when I go through books, I use a highlighter. The books that I've read, I've got highlights, and I write little notes, because it's very easy to read a book and forget everything that you read in a book, other than kind of the key principle. So that's quite helpful.
Just gonna throw it out there because I heard it this week. It's been a long week, but I thought it was a great piece of advice. Reading the comment section around your brand or a competitive brand or something like that, just to kind of get a pulse check of kind of what people are actually saying. I thought that was a really good suggestion. So, and a good thing to kind of work into your media diet as a CMO or a senior marketer.
Yeah.
So this kind of mindset that you have, these principles of making the complex simple and making the simple exciting, and then being freshly consistent instead of consistently fresh. I would love to look at a case study or an example of how has that come to life in what you've done at Investec so far. Is there a campaign that you can talk about, or a decision that you made based on these principles? What does the actual tactical execution and reality look like when you have a mindset like this?
Yeah. So when I arrived about 2.5 years ago, we as a marketing team looked at the portfolio of work that we had out there. And while we were using the Zebra and Out of the Ordinary as a pair of line in all the work, it just looked like it was coming from multiple departments and different agencies. And we took a decision just to go back to principles and say, the Zebra is a distinctive asset, so let's use it consistently. White space around the work that we do, is a consistent and distinctive feature of our work, and really kind of clever copy that speaks predominantly around our service, but also products, is something that we have to keep key to the way that we engage. And we managed to, it's a long process, right? It doesn't happen overnight, to kind of clean through the work and get to a point where the brand was looking kind of freshly presented, because it was kind of back to what its core and its anchors were. So that's the first piece. One of the challenges that we have in South Africa is we essentially invented private banking in South Africa. Now, private banking means a number of different things around the world. In this world, it means kind of really premier, high service, high end banking services. We started out predominantly banking people in professional services, lawyers, doctors, engineers. So we were able to build a really strong and sophisticated ecosystem of high service for that particular client set. But what's happened over time is, as the other banks have been focused on a much broader market, they've wanted to tap into a more affluent market. They've started squeezing into that space and going out to the market and saying, we've got private banking services, and really kind of stealing our playbook in terms of the words that we use and trying to emulate the way that we service our clients. So over time, the term and what private banking actually means is something that's been a bit diluted. So we needed to reaffirm our position again as a preeminent private bank in South Africa. And that's when we were clearly positioned as an international bank and wealth manager. And we ran a campaign, and the kind of the sentiment of the campaign line was, now that's private banking. And we used a very simple formula. We said, we're going to find things that make us distinctive and give us differentiation. And it's usually around our service or something that we knew nobody else could say. In the headline, and we'd say, now that's private banking. So we helped create fresh consistency by cleaning out the portfolio of work that was out there. And we attacked a very specific problem where clients felt that the word private banking and the category of private banking was a bit muddy. And we reaffirmed our position by speaking about the thing that differentiates us, which is our service. And we underwrote it with, now that's private banking. So we did that to just reposition the market. So you can speak about private banking, but everyone will always know that there's a certain type of private banking that comes from Investec that you can't get anywhere else. So I think that is really an example of how kind of fresh consistency is able to be applied to address a very particular category problem that we had. And we've seen some great results.
Hey everyone, just want to take a quick minute because we've actually heard from many of you that you want to get a better understanding of what it is that we actually do here at Rival. You know us for the content. Obviously, you're listening to Scratch right now, but everything else that we put out, the events, the community, but actually our core business, just so you know, we are a marketing consultancy for challenger brands. We partner with brands big and small to gain category share with a challenger approach. We develop and execute strategies and campaigns across 4 main areas of the marketing function: brand strategy, creative and production, paid media planning and buying, and customer data and MarTech. And then, of course, as you know, the mission that's wrapped around Rival is to understand and share our learnings about what drives the growth of successful challenger brands. That's it. Sorry for the interruption. I'll let you get back to the show. And so you came into Investec not having worked in financial services, much less private banking, wealth management before.
Yeah.
And it's kind of by design, it sounds like, in terms of your career, and I'm sure what they were looking for as well. You know, you spent time at Vodacom and Telco. You were the CEO of South Africa for Ogilvy. Agency background. You spent time at South African breweries as well. So you've done a bunch of different things. And in our prep call, you kind of described yourself as a super sub. So I'd love to just have you, unpack that. What does that mean? And how has it been an advantage for you and your employers? And then we'll get into a little bit about what because obviously there is a big advantage to that. There can also be the disadvantage. So I want to understand how you handle that. But what does super sub mean, and what has it meant to you in your career?
Yeah. So for me, I have always, in kind of the bigger corporate roles that I've got, have been brought in deliberately by leadership because of my skill set, but also because of the fact that I don't come from that particular category. And I think what the respective leadership was looking for at that particular point in time was someone who can look at things differently and ask the stupid questions and hopefully get some answers that might be able to break category impasse. So for some reason, it really hasn't been by design. When I left South African breweries, I went to a business called VWV as a kind of client service director and as a shareholder in the business. So that was kind of an entrepreneurial effort. And I became CEO of that business. And from there, I moved into Ogilvy. So VWV was an experiential agency. Ogilvy is the leading kind of marketing services business in South Africa. And the CEO deliberately brought me in because I had no experience of, running an ad agency. And maybe somebody saw that somewhere, heard that, and that became part of my own narrative. So all the other jobs I've had subsequent to that, Vodacom job was exactly the same. So I think super sub in my context probably means bringing in a utility player, someone who has not come from the industry, and someone who can potentially, hopefully, be able to make some changes and defy some of the category conventions. That's what I mean by that.
And how do you make sure that you maximize the advantages of not coming from within the industry, which is the fresh perspective, the healthy ignorance, which I totally agree is required for that challenger mindset and the growth that comes with it? With the downside of there are dumb questions and there are bad ideas. And I find sometimes businesses say, having been in the interview process for a very big global bank that wanted somebody without banking experience. And then at the end was actually, we want somebody with banking experience, which is probably right for them and right for me because I went on to start this company. But there is a downside to that as well. So how do you think about that downside and how do you balance that? Because knowing the people that listen to this podcast, knowing our community, there are a lot of, people are changing jobs, careers all the time. And I think that's something that everybody always thinks about. Do I want to double down on one industry and become kind of the marketing expert in financial services or whatever? Should I get a diversity of experience? What is that going to mean for the opportunities out there for me? And then if you are coming in, not from within the industry, how do you make sure that you get the right balance of the advantages and minimizing the disadvantages?
So I think the first aspect of working in an industry that you are new to is humility. And one of the many things my mother taught me when I started school was there is no such thing as a stupid question and you must always ask questions. She never used to ask me how I did at school. She used to ask me, what questions did you ask today? And I have found that to be such a valuable source of insight, information, understanding, is to be humble enough to go to people in the entire broader ecosystem of an organization, not just the leaders, but everyone from security guards to the people that are serving coffee in our canteen, is to ask them, what does a brand mean to you? What's your history? How long have you been here? And I've been surprised in my life how little people are asked for opinion and perspective, especially by leaders. So I found that very useful and a very good way of building trust and understanding of any organization. So that for me is something that is fundamental to how I have grown and how I have led in any of the organizations. So the humility to go and ask the questions. I'm quite deliberate, number two, about what I learn. So every organization has got its anchors and the things that are important to it, how it makes money, how it speaks about its making profit, all those particular conventions, and you have a very deliberate way of how to go through that. We all know how to learn, so you put that together. And then the other part for me, there's four components. The third piece is I believe in a concept called intelligent naivety, which is something that Adam Morgan coined. And it really is about saying, a lot of the big changes that have transformed industries have come from people that are not from those particular industries. If we, let's just use Virgin as an example. You had Richard Branson, who came from entertainment. Really, he got into the airline business and brought entertainment into the airline industry. Before then, we used to kind of sit and look at the back of someone's chair on long haul flights. He came on and said, "Why do you have to do that? Let's put in some entertainment. Let's put in music. Let's put in movies." It took someone from the outside to have that fresh perspective and ask a stupid question and do something that now has become an industry category norm. So I've always walked into any organization like the universe has sent me there because I know something and I've learned something in my time that can add value. So if I apply all my broad experience to the humility of asking the right questions, I've been able to turn that into something valuable. And then the last piece is marketing, in my view, is a very transferable skill. So the fundamentals, to the point that you're making earlier, remain the same. Whether you are marketing Kit Kat or you are marketing Budweiser and everything in between, it really is about, can you create and communicate to clients, prospects, and current clients in a way that's going to change their perception and inspire some sort of action. Do you understand the psychology of that? How do you build within a particular category? How do you remain distinctive? How do you create differentiation? And how do you become a business enabler, an enabler for business growth? Those, doesn't matter what you do, which industry you're in, those fundamentals stick. So I've got some playbooks that I've been able to bring with me in my bag as I walk into a new company. So those are the four things that have helped me.
So you mentioned Adam Morgan, Challenger Brand, clearly something you've studied and have taken to the work that you do. I'd be interested, it's always interesting because we do a lot of work in financial services.
Yeah.
Sometimes the concept of challenger, doesn't really resonate because it's financial services. We don't want to be a challenger. It's not about disruption. People want trust. They don't want innovation. I'm curious how you've taken that rooting that you have in the challenger brand, challenger mindset into the world of financial services and made it work for you at Investec. How do you think about that balance?
Yeah. Look, I think it's a work in progress, right? And I mean, interesting enough, I was just, as I was looking at my books over the past couple of weeks, I realized that Eating the Big Fish is almost 25 years old. That's when I read it. I think it was published in Jan 99, something like that. So about 25 years ago. I think what makes challenger brand thinking easier within the organization that I'm working in is that it was a challenger brand before they even knew what challenger brands were. So it started at its genesis thinking about the category differently, thinking about service differently, thinking about how it treats its own people differently in a very deliberate way, thinking about culture very differently. We hired a professor from one of our leading business schools who worked very hard with leadership to create this as an important part of our culture, which is about dialogue, that we would all get into a room and everyone's opinion mattered, and it doesn't matter what you have to say it, and we won't leave the room until we've got kind of alignment around what it is we're going to go out there, and even if we disagreed, we're going to come out and make sure that we execute on that particular platform. Those are fundamental building blocks of our organization. And in many ways, those have been challenger building blocks too. So it's been relatively easier, I think, in this organization to be able to do that. And in fact, Investec's payoff line used to be not just another bank. Do you know what I mean? So I think they were already thinking in that way. I think what Raymond did is he just cleaned that up and gave us out of the ordinary, which is just, it's been phenomenal for us. And then I think it's about, really understanding, I think challenger brand thinking as a category has ballooned. There are many people talking about it. I think you just need to understand, work with the right people, read the theory, and understand how you can apply some of the challenger brand thinking in a way that's practical for your organization. I mean, one of the exercises, challenger brand thinking exercises, is a program called Overlay, where you take the rules of one category and you apply them to your current category and say, if we did this, if we, and I'm going to go back to the Four Seasons example, if we were a bank, but we had Four Seasons service, what would it mean for us? And our founders did that without even realizing that that is one of the exercises and one of the tool sets that sits in the Challenger brand toolkit. So I think it's easy here because I think the organization is already a challenger. But I think you have to show value and you have to make it practical and understandable for people. And that's what the team and I have tried to do.
Love that. I actually think about that all the time. I didn't know that it was, not that I thought I came up with it, but I hadn't heard kind of that as a exercise called overlay. But the way that I do it, just to share if people are interested, is I think about what are the categories where they over-index to an extreme degree on some element of the customer-product relationship. For example, airlines.
Yes.
The lack of price elasticity because of the loyalty programs is fascinating to me. People, particularly if it's fit for business, there's almost no limit, or it's just so extreme. Like, they will pay so much more money just because they want to climb or stay where they are in this loyalty scheme. What does that mean for an agency? I don't know. I think it's interesting. So I love that prompt, and I love that exercise.
Yeah, that's a very great idea. So you don't just have to take kind of category behaviors. You could take category systems.
Where do they over-index? What have other categories figured out, and what does it mean for yours?
Yeah, that's a really good way of looking at it.
So we're almost out of time. I want to get to the lightning round, but I think this is great, and really excited to see what else you can do. I know you've been there for a couple of years, but oftentimes it can take time to turn the oil tanker. So I'm sure there are many more exciting and consistently fresh ideas that are coming from the world of Investec. So before I let you go, Abey, let's do a quick lightning round. Yeah. What was the first marketing job that you ever had?
Oh, I was a promoter for a company called VWV, and I used to have to hand out balloons with little invites at the bottom to invite people to BMW dealerships to do test drives. So I was one of those guys walking around car parks, stalking people, asking them to come through. So I was a promoter.
Real grassroots, on the ground experience. What is the best piece of career advice that you've ever received?
Work harder than you hope.
What's the best brand campaign you've seen recently?
Well, I actually, I think that the work that is coming out of KitKat has been really amazing for me because, again, it's really freshly consistent work. They own the break time category. They've been absolutely consistent. They've banged that on. Other people have tried to enter that particular consumer mind space and they haven't been able to be successful. So I just love how their work has been able to be iterated across so many different dimensions.
And the last and most important question, what is one thing people should do differently after listening to this episode?
Yeah, I think you know the answer to that. I think it's make the complex simple and the simple exciting. The world is complex enough. We don't need to do any more. Make it easy for people to choose you.
Well, we will leave it there. Abey, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric.
Scratch is a production of Rival. We are a growth consultancy that builds challenger brands, strategies, and capabilities to disrupt categories. If you want to learn more about us, check out wearerival.com. If you want to connect with me, email me at eric@wearerival.com or find me on LinkedIn. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe, share with anyone you think might enjoy it, and leave us a review. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.